The title of my paper is Foreign Exchange Derivatives and Bank Lending in China. Okay, now let me introduce. First, I want to introduce the abstract of my paper. And this paper first developed the theoretical models to examine the relationship between the foreign exchange derivatives and foreign currency bank lending in China. And in this theoretical model, we find that if the utility of the derivative use bank displays that the constant or the decreasing absolute risk aversions, there is a positive effect of the foreign exchange derivatives on the foreign currency loan in banking in China's banking sectors. And also, I used the VR models and also used the China's monthly data from 2007 to June 2014. And the empirical evidence support the prediction by the theoretical models. This paper has 5 parts. First is introduction, second is literature review, third is the theoretical model, and the fourth is empirical evidence, and the final part is conclusion. In June 2005, the People's Bank of China, just the central bank in China, start the RMB exchange regime reform, and since then, the RMB exchange rate is become more flexible. And also, China has a banking-oriented financial system, and it means that I believe that the China's economic development depend mainly on the bank lendings. And because the RMB exchange rate become more and more flexible, so for the Chinese banks, there is more and more large exchange rate risk. So the Chinese government established the foreign exchange derivative markets in the China's interbank market and hope to that Chinese financial institutions can use derivatives to hedge the exchange rate risk. First paper focusing on the relationship between the foreign exchange derivatives and foreign currency loan. This first. Second, this paper develops the theoretical model, and also this model captured some important characteristics in China's banking sectors. And the third is this paper presents the empirical test using the Chinese model, Chinese data. According to the classic Modigliani and Miller paradigm, that the commercial bank have unnecessary to use derivative to risk management because the shareholder can do it by themselves. However, we don't live in the Modigliani and Miller's world, so that the financial institutions, such as especially commercial banks, hope to make some risk management. And in 1984, Diamond developed the model of financial intermediation, and he finds that divers can reduce the morning information cost. And his model also implies that derivative usage can improve that the intermediation efficiency, and then in turn to provide incentive for banks to expand their lending activities. And also there are some empirical literatures focus on the derivatives and the bank lendings, and I divided them into two categories. One is focus on the interest rate derivative, and second focus on the credit derivatives. And in the there are 4 papers focusing on the interest rate derivatives and the bank lendings, and they all used the U.S. banking data and find the similar conclusions that the interest rate derivatives can use of interest rate derivative can increase the bank lending. And there are 5 papers focusing on the credit derivatives and bank lendings. And in these papers, the author use different samples, such as U.S. banking sample, European banking sample, and etc. So these 5 papers also find the similar conclusions that the credit derivatives can increase the bank credit supply. Now let me introduce the theoretic models, and this model captures the main characteristics of China's banking sectors. And also, if we want to get some interesting results, so we make some simplified assumptions. There are 4 assumptions. First, our model is one period models, and in this model there are 2 banks. One is the local bank, we call it Bank A, and another bank is foreign bank, we call it Bank B. And these 2 banks supply the same and homogeneous foreign currency loans. And also, these 2 banks are compete as the could-not quantity setters in the foreign currency loan market. And so the inverse demand market demand of loans is down-sloping functions. And also that the Bank A, because it is the local bank, so it also provides as a local the local currency loan. But the Bank B, because it's foreign bank, doesn't provide the local currency loan. Assumption 2, both banks fund themselves with 2 kinds of fundings: liability, such as deposit, and the equity capitals. And there are the cost of liability funding and operational cost of lending. So we assume that the operation costs are strictly increasing and convex. And also because that the bank lending is risky, so there are non-performing loan ratios. There are some non-performing loan ratios for both banks. And for simplified analysis, we suppose that this non-performing loan ratios are the exogenous and not changing in our model. Number 3, the foreign bank, the foreign currency loan are quoted in the foreign currency, and so the RMB exchange rate is a stochastic variables. For Bank A, it faces exchange rate risks, and it uses the currency forward to hedge the exchange rate risk. And we assume that the forward market is unbiased. It means that the forward exchange rate is set equal to the expected value of the exchange rate at the end of the period. Assumption 4, for Bank A, its decision is to how many foreign currency loan and how much currency exchange currency forward positions, and to maximize the expected utility of its end of period profit. And for Bank B, the decision is simple. It is determining how many foreign currency rolls to maximize the end of the period profit, because the bank B has not the foreign exchange risk. And also, we suppose that we assume that the foreign currency rolls supplied Bank A and Bank B are strategic substitutes, which defined by the Bureau in 1985. And this model is a two-stage game, and one stage is a hedging stage, and second stage is lending stage. And do some analysis, and we finally find that in the Coulomb-Nash equivalent, if the utility function of the Bank A, just a foreign as a local bank, it has the constant or decreasing absolute risk aversions, and so there is a positive relationship between the forward position used by Bank A on the total foreign currency banking rolls in the Chinese credit market. Let me introduce that empirical evidence. That we used VR models and the Chinese monthly data. And because you know that in the VR models, we should set some endogenous variables and exogenous variables. So in the endogenous variables, which I choose that the foreign currency rolls volume and the transaction volume of the foreign exchange derivative market in China. And also, we choose two exogenous variables. First is change in the nominal RMB exchange rate index, and second is China's import low volumes, because that the firms for the firms which has export, which has import business, they face exchange risk, so they want to this will influence that the foreign exchange derivatives transaction. And by the Granger causality test, it shows that the foreign exchange derivative has the causality of the foreign currency low volumes, and also that the generalized impulse response function implies that there is consistent, persistent, and significant effect of the positive effect on, of the foreign exchange derivatives on the bank lending, foreign currency bank lendings, and also uses variance decompositions. We find that the derivatives, the foreign exchange derivatives market transaction can explain more than 40% of the variations in the foreign currency rolls. This is general impulse response functions of the foreign currency loans to the foreign exchange derivatives. Yeah, this figure is the various decompositions. Okay, so we made some conclusions. That, first, this paper confirmed that there is a general efficiency enhancing implication of the new risk management techniques in the world with frictions, because that we not live in the Modigliani and mirror world. And also, this paper implies that if the government made some restrictive policy on the derivative markets, maybe this policy will have the this policy will have the negative impact on the bank credit supplies. This bit, I think that in the future has large space for the further research, because this paper focuses on the beneficial of the derivatives, but maybe for one country's government, it will balance that the benefits and the potential negative externalities for this kind of the innovation-based market. And also, this paper only focused on the one countries. Maybe in the future that study can expand to the lot of the emerging and developed countries and use bank level data to test. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this paper. I found it quite interesting and a very pertinent topic for this conference today. So the basic question being asked here is, what is the effect of foreign exchange hedging instruments on supply of foreign exchange loans by Chinese banks? So basically it comes down to this chart from the paper. Basically we have foreign currency loans rising quite dramatically, and we have derivatives transactions rising also, not as dramatically, but still from almost zero to around 2010 or so, really picking up pace. So that's basically looking at those two series and asking what is the causation between the two, what is the relationships between them. The paper itself has a motivation and a literature review, theoretical model. Essentially, are Chinese firms more willing to lend in foreign exchange if hedging possibilities exist? And the empirical, does foreign exchange derivative growth really cause foreign exchange credit growth? Those are the basic outline of the paper. So I first would like to focus on the theory a little bit, and rather than go into the details, which were largely skipped except for the assumptions. And so, is this a realistic structure? You have a one-period model of two banks. The prices, the interest rates are exogenous. Foreign domestic banks are competing to give foreign exchange loans to Chinese companies. They have absolutely homogeneous products. And so the question I've got there, I mean, there's lots of assumptions here, but let's just focus on one. Are foreign and Chinese banks competing for the same customers? Do they have special products, niches, what have you? Usually when I think of foreign banks going into foreign markets, I think of them targeting a very specialized group of domestic firms. And from the point of view of Chinese firms, you know, there's this large firm called state-owned enterprises, which aren't going to be going to foreign banks anytime soon. And so I see niches. I see the most successful banks, foreign banks in around the world, are not trying to be a universal bank or look at every homogeneous products, but they're making markups on very specialized products and to very specialized firms. So this is more of a generic comment. It's, of course, I understand a theoretical model and empirical work. You have to make lots of assumptions, but nonetheless, it would have been very interesting to me to learn more about who's doing what. In other words, you have assumptions. It's nice if there's some empirical support for those assumptions, that you can show that really the only difference between a foreign and domestic bank is that the domestic, that is Chinese banks, need to get some hedging instruments. But the foreign banks don't because they're lending in their own quote-unquote native currency, in some sense. That's the assumption of the models. And in that last point, do foreign banks have a cost advantage in supplying loans in foreign exchange? The argument is that only domestic banks need to get hedged. So as a consequence, hedging costs. So if you're going to be hedged, then presumably there's some cost issues associated with that. There is a very stylistic industrial organization, competitive structure, and solution to the model. And does it really fit the basic statistical outline? That's what I'd like to see, some data on that. And finally, with respect to the theoretical model, the basic prediction could be derived from a lot of much simpler frameworks. This is it. It's positive effect of forwards positions, and I quote, positive effect of forwards positions used by Bank A on the total foreign currency loan volume in the credit market. So it's a positive effect. So though that's, as I showed in the first diagram, is really what the paper's trying to get at. And it seems to me you could have a very partial equilibrium model, say where you have a risk-averse firm, and it's only willing to supply more if it can hedge up to a certain point. Now, let's talk about the theoretical, empirical, which was really hopped over very quickly. And I understand why, because there's both theory and empirics, so you can't do everything. So I'll start with a bit of a, I suppose a professor criticism. When I see a statement like the only prior knowledge required using a bar is a list of variables which can be hypothesized to affect each other intertemporally. Not. I mean, we all know when you're doing VAR models that, going way back to Sims VARs and all that, for those of us who were around at the time, we thought, oh, this is wonderful. There's very few assumptions. You can get away from structural models, but the more and more work on these models, of course there's assumptions. Any identification has to have assumptions behind those. And the question is, how do you achieve that? If you go to the well-known Causality decompositions of the earlier Sims work, that's one approach. But that has a very hierarchical, contemporaneous structure to causation. If you take other approaches, for example, structural VARs, where you're imposing restrictions to identify it, or work I've done on long-term restrictions that help you identify contemporaneous correlations, or looking at co-integrated vectors, looking at those to help you identify the structure. Whatever you take, you have to impose a lot of assumptions. So this is a bit of a, when I read something like that, it just have to be very careful. Any statistician reading this, and I'm not a statistician per se, but though I've done a lot of work in this area. Now let's look at the model itself. Okay, basically you've got foreign currency loans, foreign exchange derivatives as endogenous, then you've got the exchange rate itself and imports as exogenous. So you set up basically 4 variables and you're identifying 2 as endogenous and 2 as exogenous. So there's an obvious question, are really renminbi exchange rates and imports exogenous within this? Is it really credit extension to firms? Truly imports are going to be exogenous to that? And is there no feedback effects onto the exchange rate itself? So that's just a question, really. But another question, though, is are imports the real driver, the only real driver? What about exports and financing for FDI? Foreign Chinese FDI abroad, one would think that the need for foreign currency loans would be quite important in that area. Now, here, a sort of a technical issue is you start out with a levels VAR. You say, well, we're going to estimate this in levels, and then you go through some steps to show maybe that's the right approach. When usually I like to think of it differently. Here's more of a generic format, and then let's go through the battery of tests to see what is the right format or right specification, correct specification. So, and I have a problem with the levels because in particular, you do some unit root tests. None of this was reported, by the way, so hopefully you all bear with me. Unit root tests, and you show that in every case except for the change in the exchange rate, that, these are stationary series, as long as you put a trend in there. Okay, but I just want to point out that you have different univariate series with trends, and they may be stationary, but the VAR itself is estimated level with no trends, and even if it had a common trend, there may not be a common trend. There could be different trends. So that's not clear to me. One approach to that is that you may want to look at error term in that VAR model to see if in fact it is stationary. And because it's very likely that some of those are co-integrated terms. So that's why I would say this is a suggestion, that you might consider a vector error correction mechanism, because much of what you're saying really sounds like that's what you've got in mind, the way you discuss it. So it seems to me that would be the appropriate. And in fact, your simple Granger causality tests show that there's two-way causality going here between loans and foreign exchange derivatives. And of course, that's what we should expect, right? You can't have derivatives on, the derivatives themselves are a derivative of another fundamental. And so without the fundamental, it's difficult to have a derivative of the fundamental. So in some sense, you would expect joint causality. Of course, you can have more loans if the existence of these markets, that is derivatives markets, for hedging purposes is available. And that's fully what I would expect. So I find the results, going over the results now, some interesting. And your main result is what you reported. Impulse response functions from shocks, either loans or derivatives. But I'll just point out that you're looking at generalized impulse response functions. Now, those are sort of cool because you're basically, they're invariant to the particular ordering of the two endogenous variables. But why is that? That's because, in fact, they're not pure shocks. In other words, these are not a pure shock, but essentially a linear combination of both shocks. So either way you do it, either way you order the variables, you're going to get the same, which means that there's not truly a exogenous shock that's going on here. And that in turn means it's not all that surprising that you're getting very similar results regardless of how you look at the response of loans to foreign exchange derivatives, your maximum here is 0.02, or the response of the derivatives to a shock to the foreign currency loans. Here the maximum is 0.3 to 0.35. So you're getting very similar kind of response functions. They're both causing each other. So it seems that joint causality, theoretical and practical application, is what I would expect. I think this is consistent with your theory and empirics. In conclusion here, I think it's an interesting start, but it does raise a lot of other questions. Just to follow up on that one point then, or that last point, is that if this is going to be your main innovation is the empirical part, then much more empirics on what is the nature of the market, what is the extent of foreign currency loans, what are the specialization of banks, is it really all homogeneous market? That would surprise me. Thank you.